Hello and welcome to another episode of Immigrant Stories. This web series has featured a lot of guests with interesting stories about their life in Ireland. Today I decided to do something different. I'm speaking with an immigrant in China. My guest is a teacher who left for Suzhou, China in 2019 before the pandemic hit. Let's meet her.
我叫 Kathy，我了解 in Ireland rain，我就谢谢让我. That was my very poor attempt at Mandarin, and what it meant was, my name is Kathy, I come from Ireland, and I now live in China. And I apologise to any Mandarin speakers who are listening to me in advance. I'm from Mayo in the west of Ireland, but I moved to Wexford and I spent 20 years living in Wexford before I came to China 2 years ago. I came to China with my husband Declan Cody, and this is our second year here. I'm an elementary or primary school teacher, they'd call it in Ireland, and here in Suzhou I'm in an American international school system, so I'm a grade 3 homeroom teacher. And I teach grade 3 children in our school, or they're 8 or 9 years of age.
So you were born in Wexford and you're now in China, but before now you taught in several other places, Africa, Sweden, Spain.
That's right.
You plan to teach in all the continents?
I would love to do that. All I ever wanted to do was travel. So when I went to university, I wanted to study English language and then become a teacher because I knew it was my passport to travel around the world. And that's what I did for the first couple of years. For about 6 years, I lived in all those countries you mentioned. And then I fell in love with an Irishman. And we had a daughter, Aoife, and she grew up in Wexford. We moved to Wexford from Dublin when house prices were really expensive, and we thought that Wexford would offer a lovely quality of life for a young girl. So we lived in Wexford for 20 years. She went to primary school and secondary school there. And we always threatened her that the minute she was gone to college, that we were off on our travels again. And that's exactly what happened. So we did wait until she had finished first year at her request, and then we were in a very fortunate position that my job offered me a 5-year career break, and my husband is an artist, so he can basically work anywhere in the world. So we waited till Aoife was very settled in Dublin in college, and then we came here.
Yeah, I can tell you're loving life in China. Has it always been like that? How did you adjust to life in a new country, especially for your daughter?
Yeah, it was difficult in the beginning, to be honest with, because, I'm not as young as the first time I travelled, where things were easier and I might have been a little bit more easygoing. The language is probably the most difficult obstacle because there's very, very little English spoken. And it's a difficult language to penetrate from our point of view. So when I travelled in European countries, I have a background in Spanish, so I always picked up a little French or German or Italian, and you'd get the gist of what was going on. But here you would have no idea what anybody is saying at all, absolutely none. So we depend very heavily on translation apps, and we depend on our Apple Maps and our phone to get from A to B, because you can't just casually stop and ask someone for directions because they won't understand you. And that is kind of a shame because, as you know, in Ireland, we're all very chatty and the casual conversation is what makes a day. You know, when you meet somebody by accident in a pub or in a taxi. And here we don't have that immediate connection with people. You don't have those casual conversations and chats. And sometimes I feel that I'm losing out a lot on what the people's mindset is, because I can't eavesdrop on casual conversations at bus stops. And the really funny thing is, even when I am waiting at a bus stop, and usually a Chinese woman will stand and talk to me non-stop in my ear. And she's usually giving me advice about staying warm or don't sit on the bus seat. You know, I know by gestures that she's looking after me and being kind to me and, maybe admiring my coat or something. And I know I'm trying to read by her symbols and by her hand gestures and her body language what she's saying to me. And, it is such a shame that, as I said to Declan, that we can't have a little thing we put in our ears and just flick over to Chinese and understand a little bit more. It would be so nice.
And being a teacher, communication is very, very important. Do you teach in an English school, or it's a Chinese school where you have to learn all the keywords to be able to teach your students?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Chinese?
Yeah, it's yeah, of course. So it's an international school. So our student population comes from Korea, China, and every country in the world after that. So in my school at the moment, in my homeroom, as they call it, classrooms here, I would have 7 Korean children, 4 Chinese children, and the other 8 would be from Australia, Sweden, Spain, France, Germany, Thailand, Vietnam. So English is by no means the mother tongue of most of the children, but the language we instruct in is English. So they have a lot of pressure on them to speak and learn English very, very quickly. So if, for example, I'm teaching a topic, I would have it in the 3 languages, the 3 main languages, Korean, Chinese, and English. All the key vocabulary would be displayed. But the other children have to kind of help. And they do help each other. They will translate for each other and they will help for each other. They help each other. And we do encourage what we call translanguaging. Translanguaging is where we respect the mother tongue and we allow it to be read and to be spoken and to be used. I speak a little bit of Irish and I also speak Spanish, so I do understand what it is like to be challenged by language. And I do understand at the end of the day that some children will be more tired than others because they are thinking in their 3rd language or their 2nd language. Or sometimes they might come in the middle of the year because the mom or dad has just got a new contract in China. They might arrive over from Sweden and next thing it's complete English morning, noon and night for them, and that's tiring for them. But the younger they are and the more they're immersed in the language, the more they learn to speak fluent English surprisingly quick with an Irish accent. I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So is language the only thing you struggle with at the moment? Are there other parts of your career or life in general that you kind of struggle with even till now?
I think life in China is surprisingly comfortable. The school is very supportive. They provide us with an apartment. So when we arrive, our apartment is here for us. And the transport system is absolutely second to none. I've never seen a more efficient, clean, modern, cheap transport system. So getting from A to B is incredibly easy. There's shops everywhere that sell everything you need. So really it is a very comfortable lifestyle. What do I miss? I miss maybe Irish tea or coffee or milk or dairy products because they don't really like dairy products here much. And the other thing I might struggle a tiny bit with, and this is just personal to me, is I'm a vegetarian. So I don't like meat. And being a vegetarian here, it's a new concept. Meat is very important in the Chinese diet and they eat a lot of meat. So the choices for a vegetarian when you go out to eat can be very limiting. And sometimes they'd say, I'd say, is there meat in that? They'd say, no, just chicken. No, there's just a little bit of pork on top of it because if the main ingredient isn't meat, they don't see the harm in a sprinkle of meat at the top. And they do love their meat and they pride themselves in their barbecues and their duck and pork. It's all lovely quality meat, my husband says, because he eats meat. But so I struggle a little bit with that. And also I miss dairy food. I miss cheese and I miss Irish milk and yogurt and dairy because Chinese culture isn't really based on dairy products. So, it's not a big deal. I mean, it's a new country. I'm exploring their cuisine and learning lots about that. So it's something that I'm happy to give up for a short while as well,
Yeah.
And then to be honest, not a lot of wine. And that can be a problem sometimes.
Do you like noodles? I know noodles
Yes.
have to be a staple in China.
The noodles over here are absolutely incredible and they have a million different ways of cooking them and serving them and a million different recipes with them. And every restaurant you go to has a noodle speciality. So some restaurants would be famous all over the province for the type of noodles that they do. And my favorite noodle shop is the one where we have our dancing noodle man. So he makes fresh noodles out of flour and water, and then he cuts them up by his hand, and then he swings them around his head And you have to be really adept at not breaking the noodle. So he walks around the restaurant and he stands at your table and he swings in a very acrobatic way. And it's quite a show. Fresh.
That sounds like something your daughter would like.
She'd love it. It's so fun. Exactly. She would love it. She did come to visit us at Christmas of last year before lockdown. And we had plans to have her over, obviously, a lot more. But unfortunately, we haven't seen her since Christmas because of the global pandemic, as you're well aware of.
Yeah. All right, Kathy. How hospitable are the Chinese people? Are they welcoming? Did you feel welcomed when you first moved?
Yes. The thing that surprised me most about Chinese people is their sense of humor. They're always laughing. They laugh. They laugh all the time, and they're gentle, extremely gentle. They're soft-spoken, and when they're explaining something, they have this very gentle quality about them that I absolutely think it's so lovely to be around. They are fascinated by foreigners, really, really fascinated. They call us Lao Wai. Lao Wai is a Chinese word for us, and it means outside people. So often in the street, you'll hear the children going, oh, in the little bit of Mandarin, mama, look at the Lao Wai, look at the Lao Wai. And then they'll do a 180-degree angle turn, and they don't care. They're not a bit embarrassed by this. And they often ask for your photograph, and they'll stand up beside you and pose for a photograph. And they love showing their friends that they met a Lao Wai, a real live one in the city that day.
I'm just curious to know how the Chinese people see Irish people.
To be honest with you, they don't know Ireland at all. It's too small a country, I think, not really. It's England they know. So we end up saying all the time, look, it's a small country beside England. But they really haven't a huge knowledge of European countries. So some of them will have had
Chinese. There are lots of Chinese in Ireland, though.
There are. They're obviously not writing home telling their people about Ireland. It's gone over their head. When I explain about my country, they want to know two things. Is it very cold? And does it rain a lot? And that's their main concern. I explain to these lovely Chinese people that I meet that my country has 5 million people. They just can't understand how that can be a country, because to them that's a suburb of where I live. The magnitude of China is something that still amazes us to this day. The city we live in has 11 million people, and we're half an hour away from Shanghai, which has 22 million and one of the biggest metro system in the world. And I think just the whole scale is extraordinary. I mean, our road next to where I live in my apartment has 11 lanes. 2 of those are e-bike lanes and the rest are for cars and buses. So when I explain to these lovely Chinese people that I meet that my country has 5 million people, they just can't understand how that can be a country, because to them that's a suburb of where I live.
That's the beautiful thing with traveling. You never know till you meet someone from a different country, and when people are curious like that, you can always educate them and they get to know more about your country, and that's really the beauty of it all. Let's talk about COVID a little. You just got your vaccination today, is it?
I did. Today, believe it or not. I'm still alive and I'm here.
And it took you how long to get this?
So I didn't need to get it, to be quite honest. And 3 or 4 weeks ago, the school said that the Ministry of Education have offered vaccines to anyone who wants one. So it's a voluntary basis, and none of the local people got the vaccine. They can if they want to. It's voluntary. I think the reason they're not signing up for it is that COVID has not impacted. In the province where I live, we had no COVID cases. We had no extreme lockdown. We had no deaths from COVID. And that's a province of 11 million people. So they are not really, they don't see the impact of COVID on their lives. And the biggest reason why Westerners want the vaccination is we want to be able to travel. And if it comes to a situation where we're going to need vaccination passports, we want to have those. So they don't need to travel. They can travel within their country quite freely, and they have no interest in traveling outside their country because, you know, you could spend 4 generations of your life in China and never get to see the whole country. It's so enormous.
But I'm a bit surprised that not many people are signing up for vaccinations, because we're talking about China here. The perception we have from outside is that China is, you know, this country where COVID, you know, originated from, and rightly so, and that, you know, it would be a big problem not to be vaccinated. Like a year and a few months after we heard about all the very scary deaths in Wuhan.
Yeah. So to go back to the history of COVID here, it started, the first outbreak came last February, which is over a year ago. And we went into a 12-week lockdown, which was very gradual. So first it was that you had to wear your masks everywhere, mandatory. And then it was that all public places closed. Then schools did not reopen. Then all public transport was limited. And then there was a no travel ban. And then that's when the apps came in, and you had to have an app, and you weren't allowed into a supermarket or any public area unless you could show your app or on the metro, the few metros that ran. But that lasted for only 3 months. So after 3 months, I was back in school, and all the teachers were back in school, and shops started opening, restaurants and bars opened, and it was life as normal. And today in China, it is life as normal. We go everywhere we want. We go to restaurants, bars, schools are open, transport is running fully, all businesses, parks, everything. So what happened with China was there was a very drastic and immediate lockdown over the whole country. And everybody was in lockdown together, like some more extreme forms than other, granted in Wuhan, where the highest, it was one of the red risk areas. But in my province, there was no risk ever. And so people don't see the need for the vaccination because they haven't seen people die from it. They haven't seen people suffer from it. And they'd be very, very surprised that I could name people in my family and in my home that have suffered from COVID and had it, because here people really haven't. When there is a small outbreak now, like there was an outbreak in Beijing during just before Christmas. So that area of Beijing was locked down, and it becomes a high risk area, a red code. And if you've entered into that area or if you've traveled there, then your health code shows that, and then you could be in trouble. But so I think the thing is that because it happened to us first, and everybody was ringing me from Europe and asking me questions and how awful is it and how bad is it? And I kept saying, but I feel very safe because everybody's wearing masks, everybody's washing their hands, people are socially distancing, people are being extremely careful from day one. And then within 3 months, as you know, everything was fine. And then that's when it started happening in Europe and Australia and America and the rest of the world. And it's just been so different.
Did people believe you when you said you were safe?
Yes, I don't know if they did or not, because, you know, there's always this notion that figures are being massaged or information is being chosen to be released. But my information is based on from what I can see on the ground. And I could go to a restaurant and I could go to a bar, even through lockdown, if I was socially distancing and wearing a mask and if my details were being recorded. So I was trying to tell people that I know I was safe because I could see all the precautions that were being put in place, and B, I knew from the statistics and the facts that there were no people in my province. So I just didn't leave my province, obviously. And so now, to be honest, people still wear masks. We all wash our hands very regularly because that's just ingrained in us now as a routine and as a habit. And if there is an outbreak, the government are on top of it so fast. So when I flew to a small island off the coast of China at Christmas, and when I came back, there was one case of COVID found in the airport. So I immediately got a message on my phone to say if I was in this airport between such and such a time, that I was to go and have a COVID test immediately. And I would not be allowed back on school campus until I had the negative results. So the next day I went down, I got my swab. The results came in within 24 hours and I was clear and good to go. The person who had COVID, he was traced, his name was released, and it was like such and such a person who was identified as having COVID symptoms, travelled on such and such a flight. After the flight, got into this taxi and then drove to, and all these details were released. So, no data protection or privacy as much, but in the interest of everybody being safe, in case anybody met that person en route, they were then to present themselves at the local COVID hospital where they could get a swab. So what I'm trying to paint a picture of is how intensely they follow through, how careful they are about any outbreak, and how information is shared so thoroughly. And I know there are people who are afraid of information being shared to that level. But to me, I think I've been in the safest place in the world all through this global pandemic. And I think that's because of the information sharing and the contact tracing and the drastic measures that the government took at the beginning, and we've seen the impact of that in Ireland and across the world, where governments couldn't work so quickly and so drastically because of, civil rights of people and because of our history of data protection and human rights and that kind of thing. And part of me is conflicted because I've seen the results, and I've seen the positive results of what happened here. And I've seen the negative results of what's happening in Ireland at the moment and how people are suffering,
What can Ireland do differently?
Well, I think the slow leaking of information and the hesitation, I think NEFIT are doing an excellent job. And I try to follow as much as possible. And I think maybe it's just because we come from a culture where human rights come first and legislation has to be enacted in order to change or to enforce quarantine or to enforce the 5 kilometre distance and things like that. And because I'm here in a completely different political ideology, we don't need legislation to introduce those things overnight. So it is difficult in Europe, but the most disappointing thing has been the vaccine rollout. When you see, the vaccine is made in Europe, and yet many countries in Ireland haven't had access to the numbers that they need. And when you can see countries being able to vaccinate hundreds of thousands of people, and Ireland can't even get it together to vaccinate 5 million, and the choices about who is being vaccinated and who isn't being vaccinated, it's frustrating. It's very frustrating to watch from afar, but I can't imagine how frustrating it must be for people on the ground there to watch this, and the lack of guidance and the lack of leadership, unfortunately.
I also like to know how the pandemic has affected your work as a teacher, because in Ireland, the schools have been shut for the longest time, where schools are opening up in phased basis. The first class, for example, will be reopening tomorrow, and I think a few weeks ago, other classes started. So people didn't really like that idea. They wanted to go back to schools way longer than now, but I don't know how it played out in China.
Yeah, in China, our school closed for 3 months, exactly, 12 weeks, exactly. And when we returned to school, we were socially distant. So the children had one child per desk, they wore masks, we wore masks. They eat in a canteen at school that was socially distanced. And then after about 6 weeks, the Ministry of Education inspected, and they were happy with the procedures and that we were sticking to the rules. And then they allowed us to relax some of the rules. Temperatures are taken when we enter the school. Our temperatures are taken everywhere. Every public building we go into, your temperatures are still taken. Not by a manual person, it's an overhead temperature scanner that you walk through. So the children had to wear masks. Teaching through a mask was very frustrating. I didn't enjoy it because my whole methodology and ideology about teaching is communication and about making eye contact and learning to read social cues from faces and bodies, and especially when you're doing that through children who have 3 or 4 languages, social cues and body language is hugely important for meaning. So it was frustrating and difficult, but At no time did any of us feel that it was the wrong thing to do. We felt that the government knew what they were doing and we were safe and we were protected.
Um, if you were to advise someone, live in Ireland and want to start a life in China, what are the sort of advice you give?
I would say do it 100%. Jump in, feet first. It is the most amazing experience. It's just extraordinary to experience a culture like this that's so very different. And it's really enriching to observe and learn every single day something new about a whole culture and a whole people that we didn't know about. And to learn the history of China, it's just been an amazing journey. And, physically, it is so beautiful. The country itself it's really, really, really beautiful. Very, very modern, very, very clean. There's like such super efficiency in transport and utilities and Wi-Fi. And, people live very well here. There's very little poverty. The government has done a really good job with social housing. As I was coming to the end of my time in Ireland, the homelessness was breaking my heart. And, I used to feel guilty about going to Dublin and seeing the people on the street. And I said to my husband a couple of weeks after we arrived here, doesn't it feel lovely not to have to worry about that, not to have to think about that, not to have to experience it, So that kind of thing, it's nice to get away from that. It's nice to get away and experience a different ideology, a different way of organizing a society and making it work. Of course, no society is perfect and no political structure is perfect. But I think that everybody should try and experience something that is different than what we're used to, But it has been all around the most rewarding and incredible experience. And if anybody is thinking about it, I would say do not hesitate. Life is short. Grab it, do it. Why not? Carpe diem. We are not educated about life in China. In fact, we're probably victims of a lot of propaganda about life in China through various means and for various reasons. To me, it was full of surprises, really full of surprises. I just didn't know how advanced and progressive it was. I didn't realize that there's no cash here. Everything is done through scanning a QR code. You buy everything, even, buy fruit off the side of the street by flashing your QR code. So we don't know that about China, and we're very... we learn certain things through the media about what we think life in China will be like, and some of it is very negative. And unfortunately, we don't really learn a lot of the positive stuff as well. Women in China retire at age 55 and they get a great pension, and then they move in with their younger children and they mind the grandchildren while their children can go to work. So as you're walking out in the evening, any evening at 7 o'clock, in every square, you meet people in their mid-50s up, dancing and singing. And that's their form of exercise. So it's extremely social. And I look at these people and they're all really, really happy. And they all meet together in the public squares, and there's squares everywhere to dance and to sing and to walk. And I think about how many people in Ireland are lonely because they live in small houses up little country roads and nobody visits them and can't visit them. And you don't have that here because community is huge. It also means that the generational gap between the grandchildren and the grandparents is bridged. So in the morning, I take my e-bike to work, and the other people on the e-bike are granddads and grandmoms with their school-going grandchildren on the back of the e-bikes. And their children have gone to do their jobs, and they know their turn will come when this will return. And I like that. So these are the positive things Irish people don't hear. So that why they're attracted to Canada and Australia. We hear great things about those countries. Our media is full of how, home and away, and how sun always shines in Australia, and America is every immigrant's dream. Well, maybe not in the last couple of years, but I would say to anybody thinking of coming over here, you have to have a job before you come. So you have to be sponsored by your company. The company will help you with the visa process, and the visa process is really, really thorough and very difficult. It takes a long time. It's really exact. It will require several visits to the Chinese embassy in Dublin. And every time you go, your documentation has to be perfect, or you will be sent back, no questions asked. Dot those T's, cross those I's, dot those T's, whatever the word is, and make sure everything is in order before you come. And equally, when you get here, you must have a valid working visa and you have to be legal. I mean, you don't take risks. like that at all. You really don't. You have to make sure that the school or the company that is employing you is 100% legitimate, that the visa that they've applied for you is an actual legitimate one. China is opening up all the time. It's becoming more and more progressive, and it wants foreign people here because it wants to learn about different cultures. And people are curious and eager to learn about different cultures, and they want to know more. And they're very open, very friendly, very receptive to new people. So yeah, definitely jump in. I would recommend it. It's been a terrific experience for us, and every Irish person I know here is really happy here.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about China? You've seen it, you've lived it, you've been there for 2 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the misconceptions are that it's backward country. People would be astounded at how incredibly modern it is. I mean, there are robots in restaurants that serve you. There are bullet trains everywhere, easily accessible. The Wi-Fi, I mean, I pay the equivalent of €100 for unlimited Wi-Fi for a whole year. So misconceptions Irish people would be like, we're more modern and open and progressive in Europe. Well, they really, really could show us a thing or two here about modern living and progression in terms of technology and how a city can work really, really, really well. The ideology that people are told what to think and how to think. I've met every type of person here who is very well read, very well versed in the world, and very knowledgeable about the world, and they know what's happening in the rest of the world, and they're extremely well informed, and information is readily available to everybody everywhere, through internet, and we have access to everything that we need to know. So the misconceptions that it's a country that people only know what's happening within its borders, that's, from my experience, it's not so. And the misconception that it's a country that is anyway poor or not modern or progressive, that's clearly not so as well. It's a very, very modern country, very progressive in terms of where they look to their future. People are happy here. They're happy because they know that they're going to get a pension at 55. They know that their children are going to get into schools that are down the road, and that there's transport to the schools. There's hospitals everywhere, and you don't have to worry about not being able to afford them. You just go to a hospital and get whatever you like. That was such an amazing experience for me, that I didn't have to go to my GP in order to get a specialist, that I could just go straight to the specialist and rock on up to the clinic and say, I want this, I want that, I want the other. And when you go to the doctor, they give you free medicine because the pharmacy is within the clinic. So you get your blood test done, you get the results immediately, then you get your medicine, and it's all in the one building. So they're so far advanced than we are in terms of healthcare and medicine and access for everybody, universal access to healthcare and medicine. And everybody has a home to live in, everybody. Like, some homes mightn't be fantastic, mightn't be beautiful, but there's no reason for anybody to be homeless. One other thing that I learned that was really interesting, a friend who works with in jails, and she gives counselling to prisoners and that. In prisons, they don't provide food. So families must visit the prisoners every single day to feed them, because if somebody has committed a crime here and they're put in prison, then they've obviously alienated themselves from their family, or they're ashamed, or their family might be ashamed of them. But having to go to the prison to feed the offender means that you are building up relationships with the offender again. And the offender is building up relationships with his or her family. So when they leave prison, the family network and support system has been fixed or modified. And I just thought that was a really lovely way to deal with prisons and prisoners and crime. And it's certainly a way that we could learn a lot from looking at,